Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by my good friend and occasional nemesis, Dr. Fantasy himself, Philip Chase.
Hello, AP. Thank you so much for having me. It is good to see you, even when we're nemesis.
Well,
Nemesis?
nemesis is. It's important we don't get too complacent with these things, Philip. We have to keep each other on our toes.
That's right. That's right. The rivalries produce the greatest achievements in history, don't you think? Yeah. So,
Or cooperation. Cooperation works as well, which is what we are doing in today's video.
exactly.
Because obviously one of the things that we've been discussing recently are the poems of the Malazan world, and just a poetry appreciation and these epigraphs that we see in fantasy writing, that we see occurring in all of these fantasy books. And Tolkien is the most famous example of this. Poems and songs everywhere.
Yeah.
Tom Bombadil's songs, I have to admit, my eyes glazed over, they swept across them on my first read.
Okay.
On subsequent reads, yes, I like a child with bad medicine, I forced myself to read those.
The heresy. The heresy. Oh.
But but there was some stuff that Tolkien wrote that I enormously enjoyed. And the more that I read poems, the more that I studied poetry and got involved in that, the more interesting a lot of it became, because
hmm
as we've discussed about narrative, about literature, it's not just about getting from event A to event Z in the fastest possible time. It's about experiencing the journey. It's about experiencing the art and the literature. And these are things that appeal to me, at least, and I would assume occasionally would appeal to your cold dead heart.
I'm a romantic at heart. Don't you know that? So absolutely, these things appeal to me. So yes.
Um, so I thought what we'll look at today, and forgive me, I'm going to keep looking left because I've put the poem up here on the left for me to
Okay.
see. But
Yep.
the first poem within Gardens of the Moon. So we're not talking about the epigraph that it creates the frame narrative. We're
Right.
talking about the first poem in chapter 1 of Gardens of the Moon, called Mother's Lament.
Yeah.
And so I'll try and share it across the screens here so that we can both see it. Let's see how good my technological command is. So I'll do a quick read through of this. Now, this is one of the things about poetry, because so much of poetry is about that interpretation that the reader has, that brings to it. Usually, you practice reading a poem aloud a few times before you try to perform it.
Mm-hmm.
We've only just been talking about this, and we thought we would do another a poem just to have a look through, the two of us together. And
Yeah.
so I haven't practiced this,
I'm sure it'll be fantastic.
so I'll give it a shot anyway. The old stones of this road have rung with iron blackshod hooves and drums, where I saw him walking up from the sea. Between the hills soaked red in sunset he came, a boy among the echoes, sons and brothers all in ranks of warrior ghosts. He came to pass where I sat on the worn final league stone at day's end. His stride spoke loud all I needed know of him on this road of stone. The boy walks, another soldier, another one, bright heart not yet cooled to hard iron.
Hmm.
And the poem itself is called Mother's Lament.
Uh-huh.
So what I thought was interesting, in particular, about this poem, was when we've discussed the Malazan Book of the Fallen, when we've looked at themes that occur in the book,
Yeah.
there's a tension between the ideal of the warrior, this heroic warrior from ancient epics that's heavily idealized, versus the everyday life of an actual serving soldier.
Right.
And nowhere, I think, is this more prominent than at the very beginning of Gardens of the Moon. And I think this poem ties in so well to that opening, because the contrast of Ganos Parent as the young boy
Right.
in the prologue of Gardens of the Moon, speaking to Whiskey Jack, the veteran soldier, and then what we see develop over time. So Ganos's naivete, his veneration, and this mystical, mythic, legendary status he's ascribed to these warriors.
Yeah.
And what we see, I think, in this poem, and I'll give a very quick pressy here, and then I want to hear your thoughts on it, and then we can talk about it more.
Sounds
But
good.
I think what we see here is those two ideals coming into conflict. So it ties neatly into Gardens of the Moon, and it ties neatly into what is happening across the whole of the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Mm-hmm.
So, Philip, what do you think about this particular poem?
Well, I think it is very strategically placed, and it is obviously important as an epigraph to chapter 1 of Gardens of the Moon. It is, as you say, a nod backwards, though, to the prologue, where we see young Ganos, who is idealizing the soldier's life. It is most certainly that. It also, at the same time, I think, looks forward to what immediately follows, the prose that follows, where you have riga. Riga being, and by the way, the spoilers for Gardens of the Moon. I'll
put it on the title card.
Yeah. So Riga is the woman who opens chapter 1 with the prod and pull and the demands, the exploitation that an empire has on its citizenry and the people that it goes and conquers as well. So this is a woman who has experienced a great deal of loss, and we know this because the candles that she has that are her votives, but also her connection to her deceased family, many of which I believe died in the various imperial exploits. So she is a widow, and she is a mother who has lost children to soldiery, to the empire. So there is that as well. And these are the sort of the obvious nods. But I also love how this poem is anonymous. And I think that's important because that gives it a certain universality that makes it, and it's called Mother's Lament at the same time. And I don't know about you, but for me, I'm kind of a sucker when it comes to mothers. And when it comes to a mother's pain, it is something that will almost always get me when I'm reading a book. And the fact that this is the Mother's Lament, but it is also anonymous, makes it both something from the perspective of a mother, but it's universal at the same time. So there is it is obviously a tragic poem in the sense that it is anticipating loss, and it is also about loss that has happened. It is about anticipating pain and all of that. But it's also a poem that exposes, which is a big surprise here. This is Steven Erikson. It's sort of somewhat in the tradition, I think, of the poem that you've talked about before, Dulce et Decorum Est, Pro Patria More, to finish, but it's called Dulce et Decorum Est, by Wilfred Owen, who was a soldier in World War I and tragically died, I think, a week before it ended. But he wrote this very well-known poem, as well as other poems, which is basically an expose about how the propaganda that is used to whip up the citizens and get the patriotism flowing and get people to enroll, and the reality that Wilfred Owen so skillfully contrasts that with in that poem, the reality that the soldier goes through. And there's nothing glorious, there's nothing sweet about it. So it is, in fact, a pretty heart-wrenching thing, what he portrays in that poem. So that this poem also, in a sense, reminds me of that, the exposure. You have the contrast between what the poets and the propaganda say about being a soldier with the reality of the loss, which the mother feels most keenly. So
Yeah. And in one of Owen's other poems, he talks about the fumbling ecstasy of getting the gas mask on while
Yeah, yeah,
the mustard gas is falling. You know,
yeah,
we have, and I think it's not that soldiers choosing to serve in these wars, was a bad thing. There's a difference between talking about the jingoism and the false patriotism that they were sold,
right.
and the idea that there was a necessity for some of these things.
True,
But
true. Yeah,
certainly uh, the valorization and the creation of these mythic, glorious tales don't necessarily match up to the mundane, prosaic, profane reality
right.
of the frightening, disastrous nature of what warfare actually is.
That's true.
And like time and time again, we see this, our young heroes coming home holding a parade, um, because you can celebrate the soldier and not necessarily the war. But for all of those soldiers that return home, there are those soldiers that don't return home, and
Right.
the loss then that is to their families. So you can imagine any mother or father watching their child go off to war, and whether or not you believe in the cause, it would always be bittersweet, because you could be proud of them serving, but at the same time fearful for what they might become.
Yeah, yeah.
There are a couple of different aspects of this poem that I wanted to go through, but to touch then on one of them, the boy walks, another soldier, another one. So this boy, who this mother has given birth to, raised from a young boy who was out playing in the fields, who went to school, who did all of these things, who she had to paddle his bum, or he kiss his knee better when he had skinned his knee. That boy, that child, is now a soldier, just another soldier in uniform marching with all of the other soldiers.
Yeah,
But there is something hopeful in this, because it is bright heart not yet cooled to hard iron.
yeah.
And when we think of those soldiers who have served, who have come back from warfare, from the terrible things that they have seen, that a lot of them are very profoundly changed by the experience.
Hmm.
Sometimes it has made them hard, it has made them brittle, it
Yeah,
has turned them into hard iron, because they've had to protect themselves from the horrors of war. So we see this young boy being viewed by this mother. He's turning into a soldier, but he's not yet cooled into the hard iron. He's still the boy at heart. He's still that young boy that she loved, that she was a mother to.
hmm.
And so there is still hope that he will remain that way, but also an acknowledgement of the price that we as nations put our citizenry through when we send them out to fight in these conflicts. That, yeah, there's a toll on them, not just
Yeah,
their lives, but the very essence, their hearts, their humanity, that
yeah.
can be challenged.
I think that you gain a deeper, more authentic appreciation of what soldiers go through if you are willing to. And of course, people who don't serve, who never see combat, will never really know what it's like. But if we're willing to be open to hearing what it's like and to confronting it in a way that acknowledges the horror and the pain, in a way, I think that we honor their heroism even more through that authenticity, rather than saying, "Oh, it's just glorious," and all of the old propaganda which Wilfred Owen was um, exposing in that poem as ringing false and not really um, not not being true to the actual experience that the soldier goes through. It's interesting because this is a theme that Erikson does delve into in many places in the Malazan Book of the Fall, and also in the Carcanis trilogy. It's interesting, the character that I won't give any spoilers here, but the character that I thought of as well when I was reading this poem is Rennick, particularly in Fall of Light. I think he's also in Forge of Darkness, but particularly what happens to him in Fall of Light made me think of this this poem as well. So this is definitely a theme that you can see is of importance to Steven Erikson. The soldier's experience, the perception of it from the point of view of a boy who is somewhat naive, and then the more experienced view of it from the perspective not only perhaps of an actual soldier who's been through it. We meet lots of those characters in the Malazan Book of Fallen, but also from the perspective of the mother who's seen what it's like, who's seen the loss and experienced it, and she kind of knows what's coming. And there are lots of, if we just look at the lines of the poem, look at the foreshadowing in there, where you have where she sees the boy walking on this, and you can hear the echoes of the horse's hooves shod with iron on there, the very martial opening. But you see the hills soaked red in sunset. Okay, so that's obviously red being the color of blood. That's some serious foreshadowing there. This is ominous, right? There's a sense of impending loss here. There's a sense of fear on the part of the mother or the speaker. And also the warrior, a boy among the echoes, sons and brothers, all in ranks of warrior ghosts, right? Are they ghosts because they trod this road earlier, or because they died? They're no longer around. I think the latter more likely. So yeah, and then there's the mother figure sitting on the worn final league stone at day's end, and it's sunset. Again, sunset being a recognized metaphor for the end of things. So there's a lot of foreshadowing here. There's a lot of
and particularly about that image, the idea of the mother sitting on the league stone at day's end. So sitting on the large memorial stone, the gravestone at day's end, the end of light, the end of life. So what is the mother doing? She's waiting for the dead body of her son to be returned to her, to be buried in the grave. You know, that is it. We have the literal, what's in the text of sitting on the league stone, this mile marker, this way of marking the passage of distance. But it's clear that there's this nice symbolic meaning of, no, it's the mother waiting on the body of her son to be returned to be buried at the day's end, at the end of life. And you know, the hills soaked red in sunset he came. So you know, that whole idea of this is blood, the echoes of sons and brothers. A soldier is in some ways still an individual, but part of a grand tradition that stretches back in time, that they are haunted by the echoes of every other soldier. And this whole aspect of time actually plays in, and it's signaled from the very beginning. The old stones of this road. So if you think, obviously we use road as the image here of someone watching the soldiers marching along a road. But if we think of it as the passage of time, as a journey that is being taken, the old stones, this is a journey that has been happening since the dawn of time, that this is rung with iron black-shod hoofs and drums, that history is all about the march of armies destroying other armies. That is what our history is made up of. And this is now the tradition that this woman's son is joining, this progression of battle and death that has the march of progress, the march of nations. Time follows this road inevitably, war after war, and it has fed these soldiers' lives over time. And the sound of this march of progress is the sound of war, the hooves of the cavalry, the martial drums beating time. All of that is in that opening, just little tiny section.
Yeah, it's great. And then I don't want to over romanticize this, but the part where the mother is watching the boy a little bit further down in the poem, where it says, his stride spoke loud, all I needed know of him on this road of stone. And it's the word stride is says it all in a sense. There's a certain pride, a little swagger maybe in there. He's not walking, he's striding. And it's so interesting because the mothers seem to know stuff the rest of us don't. It's amazing. I've watched my wife, for example, say to one of our daughters, "Oh, you're sick. You better rest." And they're like, "No, I'm not sick. I'm fine." The next day, sure enough, they're sick. It's like she knows before they do. Mothers are uncanny that way, and the mother can see in the way this boy is walking what his future is going to be. That he is going to become a soldier because he believes, he worships probably these generations that have gone before and gone on that journey, on that road. And so she knows what's coming. And it's just kind of, it really gets me here to think about that the mother knows, and the sense of loss that she's anticipating. And as you say, the image of her it's not a literal gravestone, but it certainly reminds you of one, doesn't it?
And what's interesting, just on a structural point, where we open with the old stones of this road, and then that sort of stanza ends with League stone at day's end, M dash. So we start with mentioning the old stones of the road, the cobblestones, the shaping of this foundation, and it ends with the League stone at the end, which we're reading as a gravestone. Yeah. And then we have the line that you were just talking about. His stride spoke loud, all I needed know of him on this road of stone. So an echo and evocation of the opening line, but slightly reworded. And if we think then of stone in that connotation, instead of the old stones of this road being descriptive, this road of stone being lifeless and hard.
Yeah.
And that is now being evoked because this then, this little interruption into the flow of the poem is followed by the boy walks another soldier, another one, bright heart not yet cooled to hard iron. So it's this view of the soldier at a certain point, still the boy, still pride, being proud of being a soldier, being proud of being something, a part of this tradition, of being a brother in arms to these other soldiers, and not yet cooled to hard iron. So when do bodies cool? So there's that reading of it as well, that his bright heart is still hot, is still pumping blood, is still alive. And so it hasn't been shaped by war. It hasn't been ended by war. Right. And those are the two things that will, she thinks, inevitably happen to her child.
Yeah, and it's reinforced. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say that is what you're talking about, the idea of the body cooling and everything. It's reinforced by the shortness of that last line in contrast with the rest of the lines in the poem. You have to hard iron, and then it's like there's a silence after that, because most of the other lines, except for the boy walks, which is another moment of pausing, and it's a quietly ominous moment. But that last line, to hard iron, and there's the silence that follows, the silence of the grave. So that also, I think, reinforces what you were saying.
But again, and this is one of the differences between listening to a poem and viewing a poem. If you look at that, the boy walks, then you have the two interceding lines, to hard iron. So there's a mirroring, the boy walks to hard iron. So the progression is the boy, through something that happens, this intervening act of another soldier, is going to become hard iron. That's one way of looking at the structure of how it's actually been written, which obviously is not necessarily as obvious when you hear it. And this is why we always talk about the reading of a poem and then the listening to the poem. But I think the aspect of time being brought in here, and the human cost of all of this, because this is from the mother's perspective. Yes, it is about the boy soldier, but it is about the cost to the mother. So this isn't about the generals. This isn't about the kings and the emperors. This is about the human cost of conflict, the cost in a family, and the cost to the unknown soldier,
Yeah.
the private in the army who isn't famous, who isn't one of the grand heroes. And when we relate that then to the Malazan Book of the Fallen, so much of the entirety of the series is about these individuals who are common soldiers, who are common citizens,
Yeah.
being caught up in events that are so much larger than they are. And it's not about the grand heroes all the time. Yes, there are these powerful people, there are these powerful characters, but
Yeah.
so often the Malazan Book of the Fallen looks at what we could dismissively call the little people,
Yeah.
the the people who are the ordinary citizens. They are you and I. They are caught up in these things that are beyond their ken, beyond their knowing.
Yeah.
And we we constantly are reminded in this series of what that cost is to them, to their friends, to their family.
That's
If
right.
this 10 book series is about anything, it is about the cost of these conflicts.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And I think one of the questions that Erikson leaves open in all of this is it worth the cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't think he provides a declarative answer. I think he comes down on one side of that question
Right.
with his suggestion. But I think there's enough room in this text to allow a contrary view. And I think it's there quite deliberately that this is being presented to us so that we can weigh it up.
Well, I'll tell you, in response to the question that Erikson poses, and I agree with you that he poses the question without giving a definitive answer. My response is, I'm not going to give a full answer to the question, but for me, the power, the poignancy of the military parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen lies not in the glorious victories or, the sweeping the field with this dramatic cavalry charge or anything like that. It's, as you say, it's in the bonds that form between the soldiers. It's in the bonds that form between the soldiers on the ground. As you say, the little people, they are so powerful. The bridge burners, we love the bridge burners. We love the bone hunters, not because they're glorious warriors who win every battle, but because of these amazing emotional bonds their common experiences bring about. They are forged, yes, in the heat of battle, but there is a connection between these people that is born from that experience, and there is a sympathy, an empathy between them, a oneness to them, and that is what I find so powerful, is in the relationships between the soldiers, and they understand one another. And they do so in a way that is often with jest, with jokes, with the humor that we love so much, that is such a hallmark of the series. But you see the love they have for each other, even in the rough humor, even in those moments when they're giving each other a hard time, even when they're threatening to kill each other. Beneath it, there's this bond that is just such a powerful thing. So that's not really an answer to the question, but partially, perhaps.
But that's what I think is interesting about this poem, and how it signals about some of the aspects of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, about Gardens of the Moon, and the rest of the series, is that this is not about saying war is bad, or all soldiers are bad, or any of those sort of declarative statements. This is about understanding things from multiple perspectives and realizing there's more than one way to view something, and to be able to come to terms with the emotional cost. And everything has a cost.
Yeah.
And we then, when we are going through this, we have to appreciate the human cost of things. And that's what we see here, because obviously the line, sons and brothers all in ranks, that camaraderie,
Yeah.
We've seen that in a lot of the war fiction that obviously inspired both Erikson and Esselmond.
Right.
In particular, the Vietnam fiction.
Right.
That these soldiers might loathe each other, but at the end of the day, they have each other's backs, and there's something admirable about that.
Yeah.
These soldiers may be involved in horrendous military actions, but the world is complicated. Morality is complicated. And this is what we're seeing, that these soldiers are the sons and brothers. They have families,
Yeah.
uh, but also are brothers in arms.
Right.
The band of brothers motif that we see again and again. And so I think this poem sort of encapsulates, not only does it tie in so neatly to the very beginning of Gardens of the Moon and what Ganos is talking about on that battlement overlooking the Mouse Quarter, and also tie into what we see happen to Riga when
Yeah.
a soldier leaps to the defense of Sorry,
Yeah.
but kills an innocent old lady
Right.
and doesn't look back. That this is a brutal world where good actions can have negative consequences.
Yeah.
Negative actions can have good consequences. Things are complicated and confused. It's not a simple, straightforward telling of a story with a simple moral.
Right.
And this I think is shown in this, the inexorable march of war through history, the fact that it has drawn the lives and cost the lives of so many through history, that it continues to have this. And this is a cost to families. This is a cost to the people. And this shapes and hardens soldiers if it doesn't even kill them.
Yep. Yep. Brilliant. Yeah. It's a great poem to have early on in the series. And once again, Erikson is giving us a signal that it would be good to pay attention to when authors like him give you signals like this. It's good to look closely, I think. So this has been a pleasure.
Well, and I hope that the people watching will now realize why we keep going on and on about things like, read closely and go back and reread little sections and
Yeah.
pay attention to the epigraphs. It's stuff like this that even without knowing the rest of the book, you can get those meanings without knowing its place in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But once you know that place and you apply it to this section of Gardens of the Moon, it's so revelatory. So, Philip, I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining me on this one.
Yeah, oh, such a pleasure as always. And thank you for having me on A Critical Dragon.
And thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.